we came to the meetings and this was brought up as an agenda item and we talked about it and we've got some options and our board discussed it and I listened to what everybody has said this morning. I agree with Chairman Lent that extending this thing a week, thank you, Jerry, that there should be a limit. There's a practical limit. And I see Chairman Rain comment also about being customer friendly, which is a good point, but customer friendly goes to point. And I think Don brought up the issue about customer service. If you give somebody an option, at least you didn't shut the door in their face. So I think option one, where your person says, I made a mistake, I withdraw my application. And I get the opportunity to fill out another one. Whether I want to select a different hunt, whether I want to select a bonus point, I can do whatever I want, starting from square one all over again. I have my options, I rectify my mistake, I can still get into the draw, or I can buy a bonus point. And we haven't given him an advantage that we haven't given to everybody else because the deadline is the deadline. Utah may have done that for reasons we haven't changed. We set the date. We don't usually change it. People, it's on the application, it's on the book, it's on every place that we can put that date. So I don't feel bad about saying September or April, whatever it's going to be, that's the date. So our board says option one was the best way to go because we don't need all the other options because they're all covered by the ability to withdraw it and make a new selection as long as you're within the period before the gate comes down.
Thank you. Ken Wellington, Elko County. Elko County also supported option one for the same exact reasons Gil talked about. On a personal note, I understand being customer friendly, but let's be customer fair also. Because I'm putting in for that tag, I've done it right, and now somebody gets an additional 7 days, I have to compete with him next year if I don't draw. So that's being the fair part of the friendly also. Thank you.
Thank you.
Paul Dixon, Clark Cap. Clark Cap had a pretty long discussion on this topic, and we felt, based on what Commissioner Beth talked about earlier with chances for additional revenue and stuff, that option 6 was best. The only question we had is that if you extend that period to make sure that it had no impact on when the draw or draw results would be issued, because I think there's 4 or 6 weeks there, but you're just condensing how much time you guys have to do things, and so there was a concern raised that might impact when the draw or the draw results would come. He chose option 6, and he chose 6 with the caveat that it would not impact the draw or draw results.
Thank you. The 7 days wouldn't be an issue for us. The draw would still take place when it does. Good question.
Craig Burnside, Douglas County Board. We supported option 1 for the same reasons that Gil and Ken listed. I have a question, though, that perhaps Mr. Sessom can answer. Is listed under the cons for each of the options is that basically this gives preferential treatment to those who submit online. It doesn't address the people that submit applications the traditional way. And I was just curious, since Utah's been doing this, what kind of discussions they've had regarding that, and if they've come to any resolution.
Utah's mandatory online has been for 2 years, so for them it's not an issue. And when they really started to push this was after they went all web. We have some differences now between how people who are applying online and apply on paper are treated, in the sense that if you apply on paper, you have to provide all the funds up front. If you apply online, we can't take your funds on your credit card up front. The credit card companies won't allow us to. So there's, I guess I would say, some precedent for treating people who apply online differently than people who apply on paper. The big problem with paper and trying to deal with this is we're still opening the mail a week, 10 days after the deadline on the paper. And it becomes a real problem then in terms of how do they withdraw, when does it have to be submitted, how do they know? What's happens a lot of times, we get dozens each year, and I typically forward them on to NDOW, of emails from people who say, I just got my confirmation email, I applied 10 minutes ago. I realized I made a mistake, and I now look at my confirmation email. I mean, we all do that. We do something, then we look back at it. 30 seconds later, I'll write an email, look back at it, and see the typos in it, you know? And we all do that, and we get a lot of people who call or contact us very quickly. We also get people who don't notice it until after the deadline. For Utah, it's not an issue.
And also, whatever we do here, we can always change it. Say we go to option one and then we want to make it extend to 7 days, we can always bring it back and do that. Or, you know, it's kind of hard to go the other way, so, you know, this is not something we could go back and change depending on what our experience is. And Rick?
Thank you. First thing that I'd like to say is me personally, I appreciate that you're even considering about the military people. I myself had a son that was in Iraq 3 different times, and when he was over there, he missed twice. But fortunately, his mail came to my house, and I applied for him online. So he never missed that. And actually, he drew a tag the last time before he came home, and he got home just in time to go hunting. And that was something he really looked forward to when he was over there, knowing that he had that to come home to. So I think that's really big, that you consider the military people, and anything that we can do for them, I think that we should try. So that's number one. Number two, I'm glad to see that we're looking at this. This is another very good thing. I don't see any negative about this that we're talking about right now. Especially you make a mistake. You know, we have to give some option if you make a mistake, because it's going to happen. We all make mistakes. Anywhere you live right now, if you forget to register your car, do they take your license away? You forget to renew your license, do they take it away? No. Do you pay a fee? Yes. So you need to give them an option. I agree wholeheartedly, and I agree with Chairman Raines that the more customer service, the better. Personally, I kind of stick with number one, but in our discussion at our cabs, the public consensus was the more the better. Give them all the options possible. So our recommendation was to go with 6. Thank you.
Let's bring it back to the commission then. I agree with Rick what he said. We can't lose in any of these options. This is user-friendly in any of these, and so it's just a matter of which option you guys want to go with.
Chairman.
Commissioner Bowler.
Got it. I think it's a declining industry, okay, and it has been for a while. And everything that we can do to possibly promote this industry is necessary. There is no such thing as enough customer service. We need to get more young people involved. We need to promote the sport. I'd be in favor of option number 6.
Well, if there's no other discussion, I'm open for a motion. And I'm not going to make it. Yeah, Chair.
I'll start.
Commissioner Capurro.
I move that we adopt option 1 based upon the testimony.
We have, based on the testimony, we have a motion to adopt option 1. Do I have a second to the motion?
I'll second.
We have a second to the motion to adopt option 1. Do we have any discussion on it? We've had a lot of discussion already.
Yeah.
If we don't have any other discussion, I'm going to call for the question. All for the motion for option 1, raise their hand. All opposed, raise their hand.
I'm not really opposed, but I'd like to.
You got to be opposed. The motion failed. I will accept another motion. Commissioner Wallace.
I move that we accept option 6.
I'll second.
We have a motion to accept option 6 and a second. Any discussion on that? If not, I'm going to call for the question. All for option 6, raise their hand. Anybody opposed? It's unanimous. Option 6 passes. Any questions by staff? Got it? Perfect. They're gonna love it. Let's have a 5-minute recess. The next item on the agenda is Cliff Gardner. He's going to give us a presentation on bitter brush and wildfire. And Cliff Gardner is a fourth generation. Where's he? Oh, there he is. Fourth generation rancher in Nevada, and his forefathers settled in South Ruby Valley in 1862. And he's here today to provide a dimmer perspective on the effects that grazing has had on rangeland habitat, wildlife, and wildfire. In the 1960s, Cliff began noticing what many were telling him regarding the needs of wildlife did not correlate with what was happening on the ground. And so he began collecting historical and scientific information on his own. And as a result, Cliff now is one of the largest private collectors of scientific and historical information to be found in the Intermountain West. He's got information that you can't believe. And he's long been a champion of free enterprise and the American system of government by his website. And he's traveled throughout the West for much of his life gaining information, making presentations like this regarding resource issues, and now is one of the leading authorities on issues involving wildlife, resource management, and grazing impact. And he's in traveling encyclopedia, and I want to welcome Cliff Gardner, and go ahead and start your presentation if you would, Cliff. If you want to say something, go ahead first before you turn the lights off.
Well, yeah. I'd like to thank Chairman Lick for allowing me to come here today. And what I'd like to do as I go through my program, I'm going to try to make it as short as possible. Most people say I'm always too long. But I'd like to make it short today, and I'd like to get into discussion. I'd like there to be a lot of questions and statements by you people, because as we built it yesterday, we've got lots of controversy with regard to predator control, fires, those types of issues. And I think we need some forums of some kind here in Elko, maybe in Reno, maybe in Las Vegas in the future, where persons like myself can sit on a panel with others that maybe have a little opposing point of view, where there can be more discussion, and then we can come closer together in regards to what we really want to do to accomplish protecting wildlife and our range resources. Someone turn the lights off a little more so we can better see the slide. I'm going to start back here. Okay, now, you noticed I was able to acquire a map from the Bureau of Land Management that shows the fires that burned within Elko County, principally, a little bit down here in Lander and Eureka County, between 1999 and 2007. It's my big concern that some of the decisions and policies that have been established in the past are leading to the destruction of our most important deer and sage-grouse habitat, which is also related to several other species, so I'd like to concentrate on those two particular species. As you notice, there's been quite a few fires. You've been aware of these fires that have been within Elko County. But my perspective of this is that, unfortunately, these areas that have burned are our most important intermediate deer winter ranges, where a beer brush grows. It just so happens on those slopes above 6,000 feet, where lightning likes to strike, where those thunderstorms build and lightning comes down in the month of August mostly. And when they strike, that's where the bitter brush is, usually a heavy understory of native grasses and quite often cheatgrass. makes these the most vulnerable to fire. Many of these areas have burned as many as 4 times during this period that we're referencing right here. But when I first began to notice this, a lot of the fires that were burned previous to that time were on the Ruby Mountains. I live right in this area right here. And after a number of years, Dolly Creek Fire was right behind where we operate, right next to the house. Soon after, Battle Creek Fire, then the Baxter Fire. Several fires right through this area. The first was the Shanetown Fire. But in being familiar with that area, I concluded, as near as I could, that wildfire in the first few years after this initiation of increased wildfire had taken roughly 3/4 of the most important bitter brush habitat along the east side of the Ruby. Not long after that, we had a fire right up here on the edge of the jar bridge that's down into the O'Neill Basin. It did the same exact thing there. It burned all the way from Canyon Creek clear over here to Stone Creek and maybe even Tea Creek, and took that most important deer winter range. Now, this should be a little more controversial, because I'd like to mention that in 2000, Dr. Tony Lesperance put together a short paper. He was quite concerned about the fires that had occurred between 1980 and 2000. And so he put a small paper together and he presented it to the Elko County Commission. And the figures that he found was that if fires were to increase as they had to that point, that we would have as many fires as we have been having these last few years, or even more. One of the figures that was interesting that Tony Lesperance was able to come up with was between that period, 1980 to 2000, for every AUM reduction that was occurring within Elko County, there was a corresponding level of 1.5 acres being burned within the county. 5 years later, the Elko County Commission appointed the task force. They found principally the same thing. They attributed to the increases of fire to increases of understory vegetation, grasses mostly, reductions. They reported that there had been a 33% in the reduction of livestock use in Elko County between 1980 and 1995, a 15-year period. And they were also projecting that this was going to increase. Okay, with that, I'd like to move over and talk about this particular slide. In the 1970s, Gus Harmay, who had worked both for the Bureau of Land Management as a scientist, range scientist, and for the Forest Service, was putting on a series of seminars throughout the state of Nevada. And I was fortunate enough to attend his seminars. And he talked a lot, and he tried to teach us how to go out on the land and look at vegetation and determine what was going on in terms of the kind of class of livestock that were out there, the classes of wildlife that were out there, and the impacts of those particular species. So this is the bitter brush pan. Those are of you that are familiar with bitter brush recognize it. And this, in Gus Harmay's view, is a plant that's very, very productive. It's been hedged back like you would hedge plants in your yard or in a well-cared for area. But this has been hedged back, and then on good years when you have normal rainfall, then you get from 10 to 14 inches of growth. This is all very good for, of course, for particularly the elk and mule deer, because that sustains them during a good part of the year, at least 6 months in many cases. I took this picture right behind the house. You can see the deer coming in. The studies that I've read, the reason that bitter brush is so important is because it extends the breed season or the protein season for mule deer and other species for as much as 90 to 120 days longer. After other vegetation that's high in protein has been diminished by the fall of the year, by the season, then this will carry on its green leaves and will not lose the last time until after the first year. And so that is what is so important. Many people say you can have mule deer, good populations of mule deer throughout the Intermountain West and the Great Basin without bitter brush. But if you look at the history of mule deer in the state of Nevada, you notice across the northern part and down the eastern part, clear down to Pioche, they had good winter range with lots of bitter brush on it. And that was the intermediate area, of course, for mule deer. Another plant that's been hedged back, mostly like livestock. What Gus Harmay tried to explain to us was that mule deer, because they have just a little narrow set of teeth on their bottom jaw, they'll just come and take the leaves off of these stems. And then after a few years, the plant grows up, extends itself, and then becomes dead and decadent to a great extent, and then it quits producing. After bitter brush gets so high, it automatically starts to become stagnant. This was supported by studies that were done by Paul Tuller in the 1970s, late 1970s. There was quite a lot of controversy between the different interests. There were a lot of talk about that the cattle were taking and interfering with a lot of the important species plant species for winter mule deer. And so a study resulted that, conducted by the University of Nevada, and they put exposures all over the state of Nevada. One of them was right there in South Liberty Valley. And they found when they excluded livestock within 3 years that they reduced the productivity of bitter brush, mostly, but other species as well, like mountain sage as much as 70%. Here's another very productive bitter brush plant. I took this picture up on Wildcat Creek. There was quite a lot of controversy there in the 1980s about overgrazing, and this plant, you might say, is overgrazed, that bitter brush plant. But I can't. It's just like out here in your yard. You go out there and you try to trim your plant, make it round, attractive to whoever comes and goes. You do that just what cattle do. Cattle have a wider mouth, and they go in and they do not just take the leaves like deer or sheep do. They take the actual stems. And when they do that, then they hedge that plant back and that plant remains productive. This is a photo for those of you familiar with the country. I took this picture looking towards Green Mountain right off Harrison Pass. This is why the state of Nevada and most of the western United States was such a great deer area for so many years. Because livestock out on the ground to a great degree fireproof the range. And you've got this diverse plant community. This is right when bitter brush is in bloom, which you can see just thousands and thousands of acres around the perimeter of the rubies, but also not only on the rubies, but almost all deer winter ranges across the state of Nevada. This I took again right behind the house. I wanted to illustrate that what happens when plants are not grazed. Here's a leader growth that occurred one year. The following year it wasn't grazed that year by livestock, but just a little by deer. The next year it grows up and then it's short again. And it'll continue to do that until it becomes too much vegetation to be supported by existing water participation and the root mass that's down in the ground. And that's when that plant becomes stagnant. And that's what's occurring to a great degree across the state of Nevada today. This picture I took right on top of Hershey Pass. Very good picture. This last few months I traveled into northern Elko County, been out on the Hawaii Desert, up through Tuscarora, spent some time going down the Charleston River, Charleston Basin, across the Orange Ridge 2 or 3 times, looking at some country right there on the Marys River and over into the O'Neill Basin, over into this area. And last year I spent a lot of time over here on the 25 Zone Ridge. And this is what I'm seeing almost everywhere. With reduced impact of cattle now and sheep, this is what plants become, this is what they look like when they're impacted only by mule deer. And the leader growth is usually very small. You can go out across Harrison Pass anytime. Like I came across there this morning, you'll see the leader growth is only 2 or 3 inches. At the moment, 4 or 5 inches and very few leaders. And this just, I can remember Gus Harmay. You know, we had a diverse group of persons that were taking the class under Gus Harmay back there in the 1970s, down here in the ranch here. and there were several wildlife biologists there. And one of the things that Gus Harvey said, I know you people hate cattle, but you've got to realize that if you're going to solve the problems, particularly along the Sierras, and he was making most of his reference at that time to the condition of bitter brush there above Bishop, California, where those deer in that area were wintering. And he says, if you guys really want to get in there and solve that problem, you've had cattle in and out of that area too long, you're going to have to put cattle back, and you're going to have to keep them there until they take the big stems off and prune those plants back down where they become productive again. There's another plant, but there's a plant. This is a photo of area right south of Harrison Pass. I'm particularly familiar with this. This is one of the first crested wheat seedings that was put into Ruby Valley. 1953, I believe. I raised cattle there. I was riding there when I was a kid, so I'm very familiar with that. And it became, as stated by many people within the wildlife department at that time, the most important deer winter range on the Ruby Mountains. 1979, it all burned. This used to be all pinyon juniper up here. We had bitter brush clear to the foothills and up extending it onto the foothills to some degree. So when that fire came through in 1979, it burned intensively all that area except with regards to the crested wheat seed. And crested wheat was such a character that it cooled that fire just enough that after it passed through, that bitter brush came right back. It did not heat that ground and kill the crowns of the bitter brush. And that's what's happening with our fires. In many instances, yes, if there's been livestock grazing or some other condition, or late in the evening, just as the fire is dying down, just before you ordinarily put a fire out, you will not kill bitter brush. But because we get most of our fires in August, when we have high temperatures, low ground moisture, that's what's happening. We're killing more and more of our bitter brush in this part of the state, well, in all of the state. And if it continues, like now, we have lots of grasses on these areas. It's required that the cattle are taken off for 2 years. It creates an ideal situation that if another storm comes through and lights another fire in the same areas, and every time it burns out into more areas. And as I say, these are probably the most important in the past deer ranges for a mule deer, but there's still plenty of bitter brush that can burn and will burn if we do not change the policies that have been established in recent years. This is right over the mountain from us, right below Twain Creek, Trail Canyon. This is also another area that was seeded to crested wheat quite a number of years ago, probably 35 or 40 years ago. I wanted to show that because there's quite a lot of discussion sometimes. You see it in the papers, you see it elsewhere, that says that if we put in crested wheat, we don't get our native grasses back, destroys wildlife habitat. That's not what I'm seeing as I travel throughout the Intermountain West or as I travel through Elko County. What I see is where we have planted crested wheat is one of the first places our bitter brush comes back. And if you get down and study that plant community, I'm finding that there are just as many native grasses intermingled with that crested wheat as there was prior to the establishment of crested wheat. Crested wheat, in my view, is a win-win situation. Okay, that's about a quick fire. That's what we're seeing all the time. Another point I want to make is there's been quite a bit of discussion, one corner or another, for quite a period of time that livestock grazing does not reduce fire hazard. This was a year after, the following summer after the Dolly Creek fire. This is my private ground, that's my field, that's my camp. He worked for Free Press, he wanted to know a little bit more about what was going on. So I took him out, took him up on the mountain, gave him a tour one Sunday, and I took this picture. But you can notice that was a hot fire. I don't think any fire could have been hotter. We hadn't been allowed to graze that for 3 or 4 years. We had big mountain sage that tall, plus bitter brush, lots of cheap grass. South Ruby Valley, we had those sandy soils, decomposed granite, dries out early in season. Those fires turn too hot and heavy, as hot as I've ever seen in my life. And when they came down to the private land where we grazed, He did not lose his native education like he did. This is our neighbor's 7H ranch. You're looking at the creek coming right out of Hagen's Creek, the last major creek before getting to Harrison Pass going south. And again, when that fire came right down to the private ground, and there's no more fire. Fire was ever put out. This is another thing that's not being talked about very much, is erosion. Erosion wouldn't be such a big issue, but for 10 or 15 years, I heard again and again and again about how bad cattle were on the range because of the constant wall erosion. Then here comes the fires. Nobody says anything about removing livestock and the resulting erosion that occurs the following year. But there at Shantytown Fire, the water gap, I saw water come off that mountain and bring topsoil, come out across the road and deposit as much as 2.5 feet of soil down across the refuge, right, the year following the fire. Here again is crested wheat. I went up and inspected this area. This is the Battle Creek Fire. This is the fence that divided the Smith's allotment from Ken Jones's allotment. They put crested wheat in here. I went up and inspected it. All the crested wheat was killed to the left, to the south, and to this side. I counted the number of bitter brush plants that survived for every square 100 feet. I forget what it is, but I got the list to it. So, very, very important. All of this area, they came out and had Smiths remove their livestock early that year. I have a copy of the letter. The letter says they had to do that to protect the bitter brush. The afternoon, and Les Sharp and I and one other person went up to inspect the range. We got home, found out the fire was occurring, went down there. Within a few hours, hundreds, thousands of acres of bitter brush burned on the foothills of the route, all in the name of protecting bitter brush. This is Clyde Bundy. I think some of you have heard of Clyde Bundy. Jack Walters and I in the 1980s were out inspecting the Horse Creek allotment, the Balls allotment. They were subject to being taken, they'd already experienced a 50% reduction in their livestock grazing. They were subject to another 25 because someone had found a few head of cattle next door in an allotment where they weren't supposed to be. So altogether they experienced a 75% reduction. So Jack Walters and I went out and took a look at the allotment. We thought we'd go across the valley to a guard station that's been put in right there above the nest place about the time that Forest Reserves were created in Nelson County. We bumped into Clyden. I'd known Clyden for quite a while. He's quite a range man, very interesting to talk to. He'd take me out across the range in southern Nevada a few times. But this is kind of interesting. But he took us inside the exclosure, the guard station, which has acted in the exclosures ever since about 1910. And he said, I want to show you people what happens if bitter brush and other plants are not grazed. So what he's doing is he's preparing to show his rendition of the unproductiveness of bitter brush within the exclosure. He put his stagger shift behind, and you can see there's no new leader growth, just a stagnant plant. Then he went outside and showed us the plant out there, and he put his plant up, and you can see that the leader growth on the bitter brush is all the way from, well, this is where the livestock is, the traditional, all the way from 12 to 14 inches. Then he took us back in within the exclosure, and he took his pocket knife and he dug up the plants between the islands of vegetation where you usually see livestock travel. And he wanted to show us how unhealthy the roots were. I think these were probably mostly old plants that are not that productive. But anyway, what he did after he dug them up, he showed us how much healthier the root mass of those, trying to think of the name of the grass. Bluegrass. Anyway. But on good years, it doesn't produce, that particular many species doesn't produce very much on an average year. When good years come out, really produce. And that's why it's important. And that's it. Just a few questions, and I'm sure we can continue. Yes.
Cliff, what is the, most of the jurisdiction is, I would assume BLM, and maybe some Forest Service. What is the position of the range cons or the BLM, in these areas with respect to grazing and these issues that you've raised?
Well, range livestock industry basically has been under attack for, essentially in the history that I've read, since the forest and later the BLM lands were created, the Cumberland administration, but most intently after the 1980s. And so they have reduced most allotments, at least 50%. The sheep industry is mostly gone. Attitudes haven't changed much. If there's a permit canceled or part of an allotment or allotment becomes open, then usually neighbors are allowed to come in on that allotment, further reducing the numbers on that allotment, but allowing some. There's a good many allotments. I would say 30% of the area along the foothills on my side of the mountain, from Secret Pass to the refuge, or even further down to Overland Pass, 30% have no livestock use at all.
Cliff, as you should know, the Sheldon National Antelope Refuge it's BLM land, but it's controlled by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And I've had current and former biologists up there when we've been up to do some counts on sage grouse and the like, have indicated they wish that they would be able to bring in some cattle for a couple of weeks, if not even but a couple of months, because of the very things that you're talking about. But the trouble is, if they send that message up the ladder, it's not being done. Let's put it in place. And they find themselves being rebuked on it. So it's a shame, because I think you find that most biologists feel that there should be some grazing in some of these areas.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, I spent some time when Harry Wilson was still a committee. I think he was the last committee to be removed from the shelter. He wanted me to come up and look at that country. And Bertha and I went up there and spent a couple of nights, a couple of days with he and his wife Marge. Not Marge was Duckarina. We would use Marge Duckarina. That was quite a number of years ago. And Harry gave me quite a few documents that he collected while spending time there on that refuge. And one of the things I found most important was Harry used to run his sheep over on the Gooch Table, north of where the refuge headquarters is, for quite a number of years. And pretty soon everybody started noticing that all the antelope were kidding over there. And that was not good. They had to get those cattle out of there because those antelope needed protection from that overgrazing. And so they moved him across the valley over the Big Springs Table. And they had the paperwork coming right out of the offices of the Fish and Wildlife Service. And within 3 years after they moved the cattle across the valley, those antelope moved right back in with the cattle. And it's really quite simple, because if you don't graze grasses from year to year, they fill up with old dead vegetation. And if you're a rancher, I mean, my experience is, if I go out and cut meadow grass that's got a lot of old dead grass in it, I better feed a lot of supplement, a lot of protein with that, because those cattle, during their lactating period, particularly, will drop weight tremendously. Their weight will just drop like that. And so, like the other day, I was up here, they've got a 15,000 acre exposure on Mary's River. You go down across the Orange Bridge, you can't see a fence either way. 15,000 acres. It's been in exposure since 1991. And most people go into that area and everything looks wonderful to them. But being a dumb old rancher, I look around and I see no magpie nests in the willows. I see no hawk nests. I don't see no squirrels, no rovers, no rodents. I'm sure if I went there in the winter, I'd see no porcupines and no tracks of rabbits up down the creek. And I look at the grass, and here's this grass, it's more than 50% dead grass, which reduces the soil reception down in that plant, and it becomes unproductive in one way. But then also, when that elk comes in there, as an example, when he comes in there, take a mouthful of that grass, he doesn't like that. He can't do well if he takes a mouthful of vegetative material. It's half dead. So where does he go? You know, they found that in Utah, they found it in a lot of states, they found it in Colorado. Those elk, they create a preserve for them, run the livestock out, and pretty soon their elk are over next door where the cattle they run. And the same thing happened up here at Ken Howard's. I've been a good friend with Ken Howard's for years and years. Ran livestock with him, Rhodey's Range. You know, for those of you who are not aware, Ken Howard had all that country from Charleston all the way down to going north to the Idaho line. And the Elk Foundation and the Forest Service people, the BLM people, and a lot of people wanted that country for elk. And so they came in and bought Ken Howard out. And, well, I've been going up every 10 years. It's been 20 years. This year is the 20th year since that occurred. And we went up there again this year and looked at that. And, you know, what was it, in the 70s? 97. 97. You could have just about drawn the boundary around Ken Howard's old range. And that's where the fire occurred. And there's no elk in that area. If you want to have elk, you go back on Barrett Mountain. And when you go back on Barrett Mountain, you can look at the bitterbrush, you can look at the mountain mahogany. You don't even have to see the elk. You can see where the elk are running because they have a different pattern for eating vegetation. When you look at the vegetation, you tell a lot what's going on.
The French in Montero used to run cattle on the Sheldon too. And he'd tell you that if they brought the cattle in early, they'll eat the cheatgrass which comes up, and that, but they aren't going to eat it later, and that helps to prevent fire instances too, because they'll take that cheatgrass out.
Are you part of the Capurro family that's hunted for generations up there?
Yes, sir.
Okay, when I first started learning about that area, I was asking people about who's familiar with this. They said there was a Capurro family. That time, Rich Capurro was with the.
That's my brother. That's my brother.
Is he your brother?
The U.S. Jesus.
But after I was up there at Harry Wilson one weekend, I came home and I thought about it, and I hadn't seen any sagebrush. So I called Rich, because I knew he had it. And I said, Rich, if I wanted to find sagebrush, where would I find it? I said, I've been all over the eastern part of the Sheldon, and I can't find any sagebrush. Marge Dufferina told me, Marge Dufferina Stevens had told me, that when she was a kid, they used to travel from the Nile across that desert to go see relatives over in Mount Tourist. And every year, those sage-grouse would just get up in waves. Just one draw after another to get up in waves. And I said, Rich, where would you find sage-grouse now? And he said, he said, if you want to find sage-grouse, go down to Buster Dufferina's rangeland. And it was that time, it was right then that I began to realize how the sheep industry had contributed to the explosion through their politics for predator control, how they had created the explosion of sage-grouse and mule deer in the state of Nevada. So I started going back more and more and doing research all the way back as far as I could, back to Escalante, when he came north from New Mexico in 1776, and right up every diary, every log I've been able to find. I know there's more out there, but I studied them all. And that's why I was asking for a tribute to the sheep industry here today, because all of this was a product of a ranching industry. I mean, I can't see how anybody can dispute that. There's just nothing that. Did you have a question?
Yes. I actually had two separate questions. One is, we've talked a lot about wildfires and habitat conditions today. And you just touched a little on this predator issue, but is it your observation that the predator controls had little effect on wildlife
That's just
production?
what I'm leading up to. No. 2 points I would like to get across here. No, our deer herd. I talked to old Ted Griggs. I don't know if you know who Ted Griggs was. But he was in animal damage control down there on the Arizona Strip. He took everything from what is Lake Powder Bay all the way up to Grand Wash, down from Bunkerville. It was his area after the war, after he got out of the war. He tracked that area. And I went down to Las Vegas years before he died to interview him, because he was considered the guru of trapping and tracking. And he had all these huge heads, all these heads from 30 to 40 inches that he got off the Arizona Strip. So I interviewed him. And one of the things that he mentioned that was very significant is, he mentioned this several times. He said, whenever we were on predators, he said our deer population would explode. But he said, whenever we would become lax and back off a little bit, the deer populations would start getting better. So what you're saying, no, that's number one. But what I'm trying to point out here, folks, is we need to get serious about putting the livestock back out of those ranges. Because if we don't, I think these areas are going to increase. And even if you get large numbers of deer coming back out there, we're not going to have our ranges in good enough condition to support those kinds of herd populations. But like those pictures I showed you, I have not been anywhere where deer brush right now is not being overly impacted. For good range management is not being overly impacted because of impact by deer. And we don't have any deer in Ruby Valley. 900 deer? I would estimate, just living there, a dumb old rancher, I would say if everybody's successful killing deer this year, we're not going to, you do it all on our side of the mountain, you won't have a doe left over there next year. And when I travel up north here, I see a few antelope, but unless I go down to the creek bottoms like I've been doing and take pictures and record the erosion that's occurring in many of these. I was up here the other day on Current Creek, there in O'Neill Basin, and I get right down the creek and I walk the creek. And I'll kick a doe out once in a while, but I can drive those areas all day, never see a deer. Yes, sir.
Question I have for you is with the, Scott, just want to answer the last question before I talk, because you asked one and I just realized that you had a second question. If you'd like to answer your second question first, I can wait.
I spoke. But, you know, it's interesting. I actually never spoke to Mr. Gardner until he showed up at the wildlife damage meeting last month. And it's been interesting, his observations, because you know, I mean, I've been a volunteer firefighter for the last 20 years now, and we go out every year on many calls. This time has actually been about as calm as it's been. And it's been my direct personal observation that the two best things that you can do for the reduction of fire danger are limited duration, intensive grazing, and having crested wheatgrass. If it's in crested wheat, you can put it out. It's not dangerous to speak of as long as wind dies off, it dies. It dies right then and there. It burns to total ash. It will not reignite when the wind picks back up 5 minutes later. It's very easy to extinguish in those crested wheat belts that are put up. They're all along the highways. And we had that instance one summer. There was an arsonist. He was out, set 20 some odd fires along Highway 278, put a nice cheatgrass, or these crested wheatgrass stands, you know. Hope nobody tells this guy that these are easy. You know, please don't tell him, but you go out, we put them out, none of them went on ½ acre. And it was August. And grazing, you know, whenever there's been grazing, you can stop something wind blowing relatively easily.
That's right.
So I'd like to, you know, for you to maybe give us a couple suggestions of exactly what you think that NDOW could do to promote these fire reduction methods.
Or just get out on the ground with us. We welcome anybody to get right out on the ground and talk about what we're going to do next year. You know, the Forest Service is closing roads now. They're going to close 50% of the roads in the rivers, basically. Area I'm familiar with. That means we're not going to be able to get up there. They're saying, oh yeah, you're going to have access. But any of you get out of the range know how unpassable roads become if they're not used. This is public health and safety. Right across the road from where I'm at is where the big fire hazard is. They could burn me out. And I've got the responsibility to protect my family and my investment. When I go to a bank, I borrow money for 30 years. I borrow money for 30 years. And I've got to pay that back. That's a responsibility for me. And if a fire starts, I'm going to be out there fighting that fire, regardless. And I've already saw 3 people almost lose their lives in Ruby Valley because of that situation. So it's a public health and safety issue. And again, we need these people from the Department of Wildlife. We need these people from BLM. And we need these people from Forestry to get right out on the ground with them and put together a plan of change.
The question I had is, I talked with several wildlife biologists from different states, from Idaho and from New Mexico, as well as here within the state. So giving that background perspective, And as you talk about things in the wildfires that we've had, and Scott even made a notice it's been quiet this year, but this year we've had about a 150% increase in precipitation over what we've had in the last 10 or 15 years. How much of the wildfire damage, I mean, I understand the destruction, the loss of things, but how much of that do you think is really driven by the fact that we're not grazing versus the fact that we've had such severe droughts that we have led to a kindling of basically made this whole northern part of Nevada a kindle box for burning because we don't have the moisture? Or do you really think that it's really tied strictly to grazing and not grazing? I mean, you presented that, but I mean, the drought has to be a major contributor to whether or not we're going to have fires, or is it because...
No, if we have a drought, first of all, cheatgrass has been advertised as a key component. It's such a fine fuel, flash fuel. So you don't get cheatgrass growth. Right there on the foothills of Ruby's many times, you know, we're dependent upon putting our cattle out there for a lot of years to try to lost them from that. So that cheatgrass get up about like that, turn purple, and no fire hazard. I mean, right away we're more comfortable. And then the native grasses don't grow as well either. You know, as Pete will tell you, you know, on most good years you get a lot of water. The native plants and all that. What is that big grass? What do you know, Pete? Not our own country. We have no electricity in your country. In our country, drought country, we have plants with small crowns. And a lot of years you don't even know they're there. But you have good water here and they just...
Oh, you're talking about sandbird.
Yeah, sandbird bluegrass. That's, see, we're in a dry area. Pete's from Tuscarora. That's a better grass country than what we have. And in our country, we're mostly needle and grass, sandbird, bluegrass, foxtail, those kinds of things. And so those grasses just don't grow if we have a drought. They just don't grow. So I would say...
I guess what you talked about today is that, you know, since the time when we've had the largest deer herds in the state, we've also had the worst droughts that the state's seen in the northern part since we've been running cattle. But we've also reduced the cattle range and we have other things going on. And you try to figure out what the interplay of all of those is. I mean, I know that's not your job to do that. I mean, you've kind of presented one piece, but to me, it's an integrated story that has to be looked at, and that drought plays as big a part as removing cattle and sheep from the range. When I talk with other wildlife biologists that live out there.
No, what I'm trying to say is when we have droughts, there's less fuel out there. And so there's less fire hazard.
But we have a tremendous amount of fire hazard that you've seen here. I mean, your map shows we've had a tremendous amount of and crescendoing fire hazard.
Yeah, we do have a lot of fire hazard. And a lot of it's been attributed to cheatgrass. But I went back and probably Jim Young has wrote more about cheatgrass than any other scientist I know. In fact, he produced a book called Cheatgrass. And I went back and looked at Jim's data here a while back, and cheatgrass came into the country. They were cited to almost all the western states just before or right after the turn of the century. Then I read in the El Pavetti Free Press a quote here not too long where someone was saying, well, we don't have cheatgrass on the Wahi Desert. I couldn't believe that. So I jumped in my car. We went all the way up there, and we went out across the Wahi Desert. It was raining, we got stuck. And,
it happened.
But there's cheatgrass there. There always has been cheatgrass for almost forever. It's just that it's a black sage community. And that particular community, when it's dominated in that particular site for so many years, you might see a few plants of cheatgrass along the road. But if you drop down into Chimney Creek, where the desert rats exist, the biggest drainage coming off of the southern end of the Wahi Desert, and follow that out where it empties out into Wahi, you'll find that, and then talking to the local people, that's where all the chukar are in that area, because they've got those steep, dry slopes. Cheatgrass grows there. In the winter, you get a lot of new sprouts of cheatgrass, and that's what the chukar. So there's, you know, but then another myth that I found is that now that we're burning all this range, there's more and more cheatgrass. And so it repeats itself. Yeah, that's true over here by Battle Mountain and much of central Nevada where we have no cheatgrass. But if you go up here in the higher elevations and a little bit farther north in the county, you get up in this area, and where the big fires came through here 3 or 4 years in the Charleston area, in the headwaters of Charleston, and most of these areas, there's no cheatgrass in those areas where the grass has come back. But we do have grass that tall. And another problem we're having is when livestock were out there, we had a tremendous number of animals that were wandering around through the brush. And they create trails between they create little oases with a bit of brush and mountain sage were. And so when fire came through, there was no vegetation there, and it kept that fire cooler. And it was easier to fight. Like the time Scott was talking about when I was a kid in Ruby Valley. All we had to fight fire with was a shovel. But we put most of the fires out. If we burned 100, 200 acres, we thought that was a big fire. But we didn't have big fire trucks. We didn't have all this equipment. We didn't have all these lights going around. We didn't have all these people with all these big fancy uniforms. All we had is a bunch of ranchers that ran out there, and everybody that was fishing in Ruby Valley. Somebody here yesterday talking about in the old days when they used to yank people off the street. My dad was a fire warden. I've been with him up there by the refuge when he'd drive down the road and yank people off the road and say, "You're going to fight fire." That's all we had. And it worked back at that time because we removed most of the vegetation with livestock. And that's not occurring. Yes, sir.
Cliff, with regard to trying to go in and target specific areas that are decadent and could use some manipulation by livestock, is it the bureaucracy that's keeping that from being done? And can the livestock industry respond and go in and graze for, you know, a short period of time and then not be in that allotment again? I mean, is that realistic, or is bureaucracy just close the door on that kind of?
Bureaucracy has closed the door. Absolutely, completely closed the door. And in terms of the 2-year rest period that they require, there's absolutely no scientific evidence to support that. In fact, here 2 years ago, they concluded a study down here in Gun Ranch, University of Nevada. Much of the Gun Ranch range itself was burned, and they went down and they applied several different applications of livestock treatment, and they found that there was no support whatsoever for the 2-year rest period in terms of protecting the resource.
But as far as trying to go in and manipulate some of these decadent winter ranges with bitter brush, the bureaucracy is such that...
No. In fact, when the Dolly Creek fire burned right behind the ranch, it's always been my dream to feed that to crested wheat. And when I talked to Mont Lewis, the Forest Service, I said, now's the opportunity. Let's feed that to crested wheat. He said there's no seed available. So I talked to his supervisor and talked to 2 or 3 people. No seed available. We cannot do that. And so I got a hold of John Neff. He's our local feed supplier. I got lots of crested wheat. So I told Mom, well, I'll flip the cost of the crested wheat seed. So I bought 2 or 3 tons of crested wheat seed. They refused to use it. They came in with exotics, supposedly native plants and planted. None of those are very big success. In fact, there's an article, 3 of them come out on fires these last few months, one of them by Wayne Bergfeld, range scientist at the University of Nevada. He says the same thing. No success. If you're serious about taking care of these fires, we need to put crested wheat back out there on the ground. But they had opportunity. They went to the mines and got some. My seed went to naught. I couldn't use it. And that has occurred for the last numbers of years in every wildfire situation that I know of, is they have not been cooperative in using types of grass seed as a benefit in terms of protecting wildlife and habitat and livestock. I mean, I can't help it. That's as near as I can state the truth. Any other questions?
Got any other questions? If not, I want to thank you for a real interesting presentation.
I really appreciate this.